here's a chain of 20. To make a loop, end, beginning. I now have a ring.
What?
I'm talking to George. I can chain one. To build my loop up. Right? So now I start creating the next level of the loop. This hook is a bit too big, but we'll manage. Right, so now I have 2 layers. And so I can do one of 2 things. I can work around in a spiral, right, which means my stitches won't be exactly right over top of each other, or I can work in loops. So let me just go ahead and finish up this loop. If you want, you can fast forward through this part. So I can get to the end of the round, right? So even if you're working in a spiral or a round, there's an end, which is where the next spiral or round would start. So this is just single crochet. I put the hook in, I yarn over once, right? I take the yarn once. I have 2 loops on the hook. I pull a loop through, that is 1 single crochet. And there are tons of different stitches, but this is the simplest stitch to start with. Okay, so I'm getting around to the end of this round. So I'm doing rounds in this case, not a spiral. I don't seem to have any stitch markers down here at my desk, but let's just pretend. Okay, so a chain of 20 with this yarn and this hook is X inches long, okay? And I would be able to say for every inch there is so many stitches. And usually standard with most stuff, it ends up being about 1/4 inch per stitch or just a little bit less. Probably be easier to do millimeters, but whatevs. All right, so here I am. I'm at the end. I don't know if you can see that. Hold on. So I had my first chain, my starting chain, which is a foundation row, and then I built up one and I did another row. Okay, so this has a height to it, right? And a starting chain had a length, but then I connected it start to end to create a loop. Now imagine this was substantially larger to create a top, right? Like a t-shirt is often made in a round. Okay, so here I am again at the end of this round, the beginning of the third. So I'm going to go to the beginning of this first round, and if I'm going to use rounds and not spiral, I'm going to connect the end to the beginning with a slip stitch. Okay, so now that is complete. Yeah. So now I'm going to take it, in order to build up height to make the third round, I need to chain 1, which gives me height, right? And now I'm going to make a third round at this height. So again, I just go in here, right? I find this rhythm and the rhythm of doing this very relaxing. So here again, I won't have to do all 20, but so you can see that. Maybe you can't. This is probably the wrong color yarn to use, but there is a difference between here and here now, right? Because this is 3. So with every round, I'm gaining height. So if my end result needs to be 23 or 24 inches in height, and I have so many rounds per inch, do I just use the number of rounds per inch multiplied by the amount of rounds that I need, right? So if I have 4 rounds per inch and I need 24 inches, is that 24 times 4? And that's how many rounds I would need to have 24 inches in length, right? I mean, I could just keep going until I have 24 inches, but if I'm trying to write a pattern for someone else to follow, I mean, I have seen patterns written like that, but I'm just I want it to be a little bit more precise, right? So I can just go around this loop. And there's all kinds of different techniques when you're working in a circle, but then there's also techniques when you're just working in a square, right? For example, this is not a loop. When I made my foundation chain, I didn't make a circle. This is just flat, right? And it's X amount of stitches wide and so many stitches long with a variety of different stitch patterns that are irrelevant to this. So the concept of this was that it would button like a bracelet, right? I would put a button on there. It'd be like a bracelet with, there was going to be something else. So anyway, that's the difference between working in a flat piece that you can make into something or working, in a round piece, right, that creates something else. Where this gets different is if I were to start a different kind of beginning, which is a magic circle. And this is getting more complicated, but instead of making a chain, I'm making a loop, and I'm going to stitch into the loop. So this is how I start making three-dimensional objects, amigurumi and stuff like that. Cups, bowls. Usually the beginning first two are really hard to get going, and then it moves on. So I'll just do 6 so you can see the concept. So 6 half double crochets, which is pretty typical for a magic ring. The half double crochet is irrelevant to you. It's a matter of the math. It's the math of doing this that is confusing me. And I mean, it follows patterns, but I'm having a hard time figuring out. What did I do there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll just do one more. Okay, so now what I have here. Okay, so I have a circle. Sorry about the camera work, it's pretty bad. I have a circle that I've made, and I've stitched 6 or so stitches around this circle. So now what I can do is pull on my tail, and it creates this, rather than a loop, I now have what will end up being a circle. So if I take the end and I slip stitch this bad boy to the beginning stitch, the very first half double crochet I put in here, right? And I just slip stitch. Now I have a circle, right? From this, I can do 2 stitches in each one, and the circle will grow, right? So I can go back in here and go in each one of these stitches twice, and now from 6 I'll have 12, right? So I put 2 stitches, that's called an increase, into each, whoa, until I screwed up, into each stitch from the circle below. I'll do this as quickly as possible so you're not bored out of your mind. So for many years, I've just followed other people's patterns, and I would sometimes end up with something that I didn't quite like, you know, I wanted maybe something different, and would try to design my own things, and I would get a little lost in the math. And so I tried to follow templates and stuff like that, but it wasn't always kind of working out the way I needed. So this is very crude and not very well done, but I'm trying to be quick so you don't have a 40-minute video to watch. And I'm having surgery on my left wrist today because it's already going numb. So now I'm back at the beginning, and this little tail tells me that I'm back at the beginning of this round, right? And then as this gets bigger, I would use a stitch marker to indicate where the beginning of that circle is. But now instead of a loop, I have a circle. And this can be worked in a spiral or in rounds, depending on whether or not I just slide to the next layer or I build up and go across. Okay, so that's some of the basics stuff. So you can either work flat like this, right? And this top I'm trying to make, I could do that. I could, sorry, I haven't showered yet today. I could do a front piece and a back piece and then seam them up the side like a lot of garments are created, or I could stitch in a circle up to a certain height and then build up the front. It's more like a tank top. It's like a summer tank top thing. What I'm trying to do is recreate a top that I bought 25 years ago and loved and wore it out, and it is not pretty to wear anymore. So I was trying to make it a new one in crochet, and I thought if it worked out really well, I could put it up, and other people could make that shirt from the pattern. So those are the different techniques. I'm sorry I didn't use other yarn for you. So flat, right? Rows. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 stitches, single crochet, and that ends up being about 3 inches wide, right? So I would have to divide 10, 3 by 10 and get or I could just measure how wide each stitch is, right? And then I would have an idea of if I had 10 and it's 3 inches and I needed 6 inches, then it would be 20, right? It's like the math seems simple, but in my mind it gets all wonky. And then as far as the length goes, how high, when I build up the next row, right? How high is that row? So again, we would go through, and this depends on the stitch. You can't just say it's always X, because these hooks have different circumferences, right? They're different thicknesses. This one is 3.5 millimeters. They go all the way up to 9 millimeters, so they're pretty thick. They go all the way down to 1 millimeter, which is like doilies and lace. So obviously, if you're using doily and lace needle and you're using thread, each row is not going to be the same height as this, right? This is a worsted weight number 4 with a 5 hook, which is very common gauge. So each row is, this is the wrong ruler to be using. I have a better one upstairs with my stuff, but we would go from the bottom of one row to the top of the same row, and in this case it is 1/2 inch. This is a back loop only half double crochet, which means nothing to you other than different stitch gives different heights, okay? And that's all dependent on the yarn and the needle. So a half stitch, a back loop half only double crochet in 3.5 and worsted weight is going to be a different height than if I used a 9 millimeter hook and bulky, right? That's going to be a lot taller. So the gauge is what that is. It's the math that I'm more concerned about, but it depends on the height and the width of each stitch that you're using, whether or not you're using it flat, you're using it in a loop, or you're making a circle. Is that enough for now? Cool. I look like crap, so I'm going to go take a shower and get cleaned up. All right, so I will, I'll probably have to put this on YouTube since I don't have a Dropbox file big enough for this, and I'll just put on YouTube and make it private and send you the link. Okay, bye.